Okay, great. So Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to our First Friday event. It is the first event of 2024, which is quite a shock in terms of where we're at. But so for complete transparency, the event today was intended to be Mr. Melvin Lusty, who many of you will know and hopefully, if not love, admire as a very successful franchisor that's been involved in franchising for many decades now in the UK. Unfortunately, Melvin has been struggling with his health, as in got a cold this week, to the extent he's now lost his voice. So we have switched events, and Natalia was scheduled to do the February event, and has very kindly and to some degree bravely stood forward and volunteered to take over and become the guest for the January event to kick off our schedule for 2024. So without further ado, I think lots of you will probably know, but just to confirm, Melvin is coming back for the February event. He'll apparently just have returned from a Nordic cruise, so he said he'll be suntanned. I don't think so, but there we go. So he's going to do the February event, which is going to be on the 9th of February, because we're avoiding the first Friday, which is the franchise exhibition. And so Natalia has kindly volunteered to step in today. So hello, franchise friends. Thank you, Simon, and Happy New Year to you too. And I'll pass over to you, Natalia, to take the floor or take the slides.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Julie, and thanks everyone for joining. And like Julie said, you've not got Melvin, you've got me instead. But hopefully, hopefully my presentation will be exciting as well, but albeit in different ways. So let me just share my screen and see if that works. So do forgive me, because I've not had very long to prepare, and if I do cough, I apologize in advance. So hopefully you can see my screen.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, the full screen, yeah.
Yeah.
Fab, okay. So I'll start with, I suppose, I entitled today's presentation as My Journey in Franchising. So I'll tell you a little bit about me and where it all started and how I ended up in franchising and what I do. So for those of you who don't know, I was actually born in the USSR. So I saw the communist Russia, so to speak, and the transition of that into what we have today. And I can honestly say that never, at the time when I was still there, I could have never imagined myself living in a foreign country, speaking a different language, and becoming a lawyer. So that certainly wasn't what I imagined or I had imagined myself doing. I came to the UK at the age of 14. My family is still in Russia, so I came over by myself, and I was at a boarding school. And at that time, I suppose I was still sort of not entirely sure what I would become or where I'd go. I very much always wanted to be a teacher, and thought that my career would go into some sort of teaching and working with children, because that was really my passion and something that I always wanted to do. However, because obviously I started doing languages, so obviously I was, at the time when I came over, I could already speak English and had some sort of command of English. I also started learning German and was fluent in German. So then I sort of thought, oh, maybe I'll do something that takes me into languages. So having attended school, I did my GCSEs, A-levels. I then went on to university. And that, I suppose, was the time when I realized that actually the direction of my travel is going to go into law, because that's what my father wanted me to do. And because daddy was paying for my tuition, which wasn't very cheap, because I was a foreign student. So if dad wanted me to study law, then that's what I had to do. So I went to University of Warwick and I did a law degree, but I still wanted to maintain my languages. So I actually did law with German law and spent a year abroad studying in Germany as well. And I suppose that was the time when I started really delving into the different types of law and realized that what I really, really enjoyed was sort of competition law, international law, all aspects of trade law, anything to do with businesses and how businesses were operating. And I found that really interesting, and I wanted to sort of specialize more in that. However, having finished university, the next step, if you want to become a lawyer, is to do a training contract, which is essentially 2 years on the job practical experience. Now, at the time, I struggled to get a training contract because I was a foreign student. I was a foreign national. I needed a visa in order to be able to get a job of that type. And there was just simply, it was just simply that something that wasn't very easily to obtain. And because my degree was sort of, I finished with a 2-1, so it was very much sort of what a lot of people who finished a law degree had as well. So I wasn't necessarily absolutely stand out there. I just found myself really struggling to get a training contract because I didn't have the visa. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to carry on, and I applied for a place because again, to become a lawyer, you have to do a legal practice course, which is another degree after the law degree. So I applied to do that, but I applied for a place on a teaching course at the same time, and I got accepted for my on my law course one day before I got my acceptance on the PGCE. So that very much sealed my my future, and I ended up going to the University of Law to complete my legal practice course, which I did. And my intention there was to get the best result I possibly could, so that I could differentiate myself from others, and so that I had an opportunity to possibly get a job after I've finished that, and sort of say, give myself a better chance of getting a visa. So I did that. I finished with distinction and started looking at jobs again. And at that point, I sort of realized that actually, you know what, although I did enjoy law and liked law, I didn't know whether I would enjoy working in a law firm, because, having done work experience is one thing, but actually working in a law firm full time can be very different. So I thought, to begin with, I will just I'll go and sign up with agencies and look for legal secretarial work, so that I could try out just the experience of being in a law firm. And one day I got a phone call from one of my agents, and they said, yeah, we've got you an interview. It's a small niche firm in Birmingham. They sent me the details, and I got the details, and I thought, oh, okay, franchising. I've never heard of that. I've never done that in all the time, at university, all the things that I've studied, that wasn't something that I came across. So I went on the firm's website. I saw that the main partner wrote a book. So I went to the shops, I bought his book, and I started reading his book prior to going to my interview. And that was, of course, Hamilton Prat. So having bought John's book, I've read it from cover to cover, ready for my interview. And obviously I successfully completed my interview and was offered a position as a secretary. So I started my journey within the franchise industry, having really I didn't know anything about franchising until I met John and read his book. And so it was very much jumping into the deep end. But that was, for me, in my experience, for me, that personally, that was the best way to do it. And I really, really enjoyed, the more I learned about franchising, the more I enjoyed it. And the reason for that, I think, it's because when we say franchising, that encapsulates just so many things. Franchising captures so much. And from a legal perspective, I got to support clients with trademark registrations. So it's about intellectual property. It's about ongoing trademark and copyright infringement. And I got involved in doing all those things. Obviously, I started assisting clients with their franchise agreements, and then eventually, as I progressed, I was drafting franchise agreements, all aspects of franchise agreement renewals. So assisting clients with all of that. Franchise resales, whether acting for the franchisor or acting for buyers or for sellers of franchise businesses. Obviously, there are certain businesses within the franchise sector which are business to consumer. So there are consumer law implications. So it's sort of helping clients to navigate through that landscape. And last but not least, part of my remit was data protection, just because, especially at the time, nobody really understood it or wanted to get involved with it. So it usually ends up on the most junior person's desk. And as a result, I got pretty good at that. So just a few names that you might recognize, and these are just examples of sort of the brands that I personally have worked with. And there are many, many more. It would just not fit on the slide, and you'd need a whole other presentation. But just to show you sort of, the variety of businesses from large to small, different sectors, different issues. But I had the privilege of supporting all of them on various matters. And after 7 years with John, I felt that it was time for me. I just wanted to try something else, do something more. And at the time, the opportunity arose for me one thing I knew is that I knew that I didn't want to leave franchising. So I really wanted to stay in that. And so as a result, I went in-house. So I left Hamilton Prat and I jumped ships and I joined Home Instead. And Home Instead at the time were sort of around 100 franchisees. They were, Home Instead at the time was still owned by Sam and Trevor Brocklebank. But because they were already a brand that I was working with, that transition was very easy. But at the same time, it made me realize that how much there was that I didn't know about them, about the brand, about the business, about how it operated. And of course, obviously, Home Instead was and is a franchisor. So I sort of stepped out of from my shoes of being a lawyer, and as a result, became so much more. Because when you go in-house and you suddenly, you're part of that business, and for me, it really opened my eyes on, how it really works. It really opened my eyes to what it means to be a franchisor. Yes, I was supporting and advising franchisors, but I was only supporting and advising them from my external position as a lawyer, whereas this was really an opportunity to understand how it works from the franchisor's point of view, all the different considerations that you've got to take into account. Excuse me. And I must say that experience was absolutely invaluable. But just to give you sort of a flavor of the type of things that I did and we got involved with. I mean, I was on the senior leadership team, so I was lucky enough to be, to be at the table, to be sort of part of a strategic decision-making process, part of the discussions, and part of framing that strategy of where we were taking the business. But one of my first personal sort of projects was when I first arrived, and it was sort of to create an in-house legal function, because that obviously wasn't there before, because Home instead were using external lawyers, i.e. Hamilton Prat and me when I was there. So it was sort of coming on the inside and understanding all the other departments, understanding the business, understanding all the interactions, and understanding how legal fits in and where legal can help and how it can help, and how that sort of interacts with the business. So one thing I wanted to do was to go paperless, and there are many reasons why, but one of the one of the considerations was I wanted information to be more readily available, to make my department, therefore all of us as a business, more efficient, to be able to access things easier, to be able to track, predict, and plan. And in that sense, what I mean by that is also just looking and anticipating of when we're going to have busier times, what we've got coming up, manage my own time around, if I knew that we will have 20 renewals in March, I knew that I wasn't going to be taking holiday in March, for example. But also planning on a bigger scale. Are you looking at, who the signatories are, who do I need to have in place in order for things to happen, and making sure that if I know something is coming up, I can then liaise with my colleagues. I can make sure that Martin, if he needs to sign, Martin is available to sign. I can make sure that that is all in place so that things can continue to work, and we don't run into difficulties. So going from paper to paperless was a big project that we did. In terms of the franchise agreements, it was sort of, again, it's looking at are the franchise agreements, what's the process for getting them signed? How does that work with the franchise recruitment team? Because obviously, it's really super important that, the franchise recruitment team, they're the ones who are going out and finding the prospective franchisees, taking them through the process. And I didn't want to be the break in that process. So I didn't want to be the one who kind of went, oh, no, I don't, I need more time. So it's sort of, so for me, it was incredibly important to build the relationship with the franchise recruitment team to make sure that I understood their process. They understood what information I needed in order to get that agreement ready and what the stages were, so that we could ensure that if a prospect was ready, that we could get everything lined up and get that franchise agreement executed swiftly, correctly, that everything, that it was signed correctly, and everything was done correctly. Because actually, there are so many times when, if an issue does arise at any point in the future, and you do, if as a franchisor, you do need to take action, you then turn to the franchise agreement. And if the franchise agreement isn't signed correctly or at all, or there is an issue with it, then that becomes a problem that really you could have done without. And although it can be overcome, in an ideal world, you don't want to, that it can be avoided. So it should be avoided to make your life easier. So if you have a really good process, and that process works, then that makes your life a lot easier in the future. I know that this is something that was talked, at previous legal BFA legal seminars, where I know Nina last year raised that and said, you spend so much money on your franchise agreements, and then it's usually sort of the most junior person's job to get them issued for signature and get them signed. And it's not their fault, but sometimes that junior person may not necessarily know what they're looking for in terms of whether or not the document has been signed correctly and whether or not it's been done properly. So it's really important just looking at your process and checking that everything is working as it should and where you can maybe tweak it to make it better. And then it's talking about, again, tracking things. I very much like processes. I'm very process driven. So I wanted to know exactly what we've got coming up. So in terms of renewals, I wanted to know exactly what's coming on the horizon, what we have when. So again, we put a process in place for managing renewals so that it could be as smooth and the experience can be as smooth as possible for existing franchisees. Because they've got their businesses, they're operating their businesses, they want to make sure that their franchise agreement is renewed and things are done properly. So, for example, what I mean is obviously franchise agreements should be, renewal should be conditional on certain criteria. So it's important that that process is in place so that you as a franchisor can manage that process. And if the franchisee is not performing, then that's picked up early enough so that you can maybe do something about it instead of just going through and renewing and going into another 5 years without resolving an issue if there is an issue. And then it's about having processes for any changes. So any changes that happen during the term of the franchise agreement, perhaps an individual leaves or an individual joins, or there's a change to the territory or any other change. Again, how are those changes actioned? Is there a process for sort of who needs to authorize, and are they documented? So if something has been agreed, has it actually been documented correctly? So then it's been recorded and that change is actioned correctly from document point of view. Terminations, exits, again, we had a process for that. And of course, we actively managed resales by being involved from day one, and actually even earlier than day one, because I always say that, selling a business is takes time, and ideally you should be preparing for this in advance. So actually the process of selling your business starts way before you actually put the business on the market. We went through quite a lot of change management during my time at Home Instead. So again, one of the rollout of new software that was system-wide, and that's a huge, big undertaking. And for franchisors especially, it's such a big project to manage. And for me, it was really highlighted the importance of teams working together, planning, everyone coming together from all the different teams, sitting down, kind of, IT, marketing, ops, legal, discussing how we were going to tackle that, how was best to roll it out. And we did it in waves. And then it was about sort of how do you pick which franchisees go where. And also sort of, selling it to your network in terms of going, this is what we're doing, but explaining why and what the benefits are to them and why they should be excited about it, and volunteering perhaps to be the early adopters, etc., etc. But it really for me highlighted the importance of working together, but understanding how it impacts everything that you do, how it impacts on the franchisees and their businesses, because actually they have so many balls that they have to keep up in the air, and all those plates that they've got spinning, and you throw yet another thing at them, and it's just being aware that sometimes they're able to cope with that and sometimes perhaps not so much. So it's sort of yeah, really being aware of that side. Then of course we had data protection, GDPR, so that was something that I very much drove through the network. Third-party contracts. So again, as a franchisor, you will be contracting with third parties for not just for your benefit, but for the benefit of your network. So it's making sure that those contracts work, that they're correctly drafted, that they protect not just you, but also the network, and that they've got appropriate liability clauses, etc. And you know, performance management in terms of managing the network. Again, I worked very closely with the franchise team and the business performance team to make sure that we had the processes, that they were documented. What I found a lot, working with lots of franchisors, you know, both sort of at, you know, when I worked at Home Instead, but also since, is that some franchisors are really good at you know, they've got a really good process. They're very good at going through that process. But the step that most franchisors stumble on is the follow-up. And I cannot emphasize enough the importance of the follow-up, because if you miss that step, if you don't follow up, if you don't evidence it, then sometimes, you know, if it doesn't quite resolve, then you know, you have to go all the way to the beginning, and you will have lost all that time that you've spent going through the process. So follow-up is really, really important. And it's about internal and external education. And what I mean by that is, you know, sometimes there is sort of there can be sort of a feeling, oh, this is legal, they can deal with it. But actually, I find that most problems are not necessarily solved in a legal way. There's always operational. And actually, it's understanding, it's for, you know, for me, it was important that my colleagues understood exactly what I did and what I could and couldn't do, and how we, you know, how it worked, so that they knew when to come to me, and the type of things that they should be bringing to me. But equally, it was important for me to understand their job roles. So if something happened, or you know, there was a conversation, I knew exactly who I needed to get to the table and who I would need to, you know, to consult. And that was, I suppose, it's one of the takeaways for me was, it's, you know, whether it's your project or it's not your project, there are always going to be people, teams that you need to consult with. And then there are always people and teams that you need to inform. And it's so important, again, not to miss those steps, because if you don't consult with the right people, then you might find that actually that becomes a problem later on. If you've missed something out and you've not taken into consideration their points of view, then, you know, your whole project might be at risk. So after 7 years at Home Instead, I felt that having had that experience of being part of a franchisor organization, but also being a lawyer, I really wanted to bring my knowledge and experience and help other franchisors out there. So I took the decision to come back into private practice. So a couple of years ago, I left Home Instead and I came back to private practice and joined a law firm. And I suppose, and that was, yeah, so that was the reason why I came back to the sector. And I wanted to really be able to help franchisors who are either new, or, you know, to establish processes and make sure that they build things in the right way from the beginning, or those franchisors who are, you know, looking to build their networks and looking to implement things to help them on their journeys. And I think if there are a few things that sort of a couple of things I wanted to touch upon today. And one is, it really is about understanding the business. So for me as a lawyer, it's always so important that I understand my client's business. I want to know exactly how they operate, what works in their business, what's important to them. Because if I understand your business, that makes it so much difficult for me, so much easier for me to say, right, this may not be appropriate, focus on this, or you should be aware of that. So understanding the business is really crucial. But just the same is sort of that cross-team work that I already mentioned. It's working together and educating each other on what you do, what different departments do, and how it works. It's about having the good processes in place. It's about implementing, following up, and escalating. So again, knowing what the next step is. And decision making. So I put who is at the table, because again, it's my observation is that it is essential to have the right people at the table. Obviously, if you have too many people, it makes the decision-making process much slower and complex. But at the same time, whatever the project is, you need to consider who needs to be at that table and make sure that you don't miss the people who absolutely need to be there. So I wanted to talk about a couple of things that come up again and again and again that I see with franchisors, that I just wanted to, and also that have come up recently in some of the cases that we've seen last year. So, excuse me. One of the things I wanted to talk about was the use of images and copyright and trademarks. So in terms of, for example, use of images. So here you've got, we have copyright. And the important thing to remember about copyright, and if you take one thing away from today, like that's all, I'd be really happy if you remember this. So copyright arises automatically. So you don't, there's no, once something is created, copyright just happens. And copyright typically is owned by whoever created something. So the author of that piece of work would usually have the copyright. The only exception to that is when the author is an employee. And usually, if the author is an employee, then in the employment contract, there would be a clause that talks about the fact that whatever that person creates will belong to the employer. But again, do check your employment contracts, because if that clause isn't there, then potentially whatever your employees create, they could take it and use it somewhere else. So it's really super important. So number one, if it's your employees who are creating stuff, make sure that you are covered. If you are commissioning artwork from a third party, for example, a photographer, again, most photographers work on, when you've got a photographer, a third party photographer, the copyright would belong to them. So in your contract with the photographer, you have the option to negotiate whether you want the copyright assigned to you, or whether you will simply have a license to use that artwork. So the difference is, and usually, you can tell which one you have by the difference in the price, because if the copyright is assigned, typically that's more expensive, because then the photographer doesn't have the right to use it elsewhere. But this is something you do need to check, because if you only have the license to use, but the copyright doesn't actually belong to you, then again, depending on what is in that contract between you and the third-party photographer, potentially the photographer can sell it to somebody else, they can use it in other ways. What you don't want is obviously for the work that you've commissioned to be used by your competitors. So it is important to discuss all those things with the third party and make sure that all of that is documented, and that you know and understand what it is that you've commissioned and what you're paying for, and where you stand with the right to those images. That is also important, because if you have to enforce your rights afterwards, you need to know from a legal perspective whether you are saying, the copyright belongs to us, and if there is a copyright infringement, that you're actually enforcing it, or whether you're saying, we have the license and it's an exclusive license, and therefore you don't have you're right, the third party doesn't have the right to use them. So that is an important point. The other thing that I have seen in my time is the use of online images. So sometimes, whether it's, sometimes franchisees, sometimes it's, the marketing department of a franchisor, just go online, take an image, put it into, whatever it is that they're working on. Now, a lot of images, most of the images online are copyright protected, and are, belong to other people. So whilst you can buy them, often you can't just take them and use them for free. So again, it's really important to check that the image you're taking, whether it's, it's licensed and therefore you need to pay for it, or whether it is actually free and can be used. Even if you think it's not licensed and you take it and you just use it, if it belongs to somebody, that person, will come after you, or is likely to come after you, and then you might receive an invoice for quite a large sum asking you to pay for the license fee. So, just be aware of that, and also educate your franchisees. I mean, they shouldn't really be doing that, because if your franchise agreements say that they should only use the stuff that you give them, then that shouldn't be a problem. But I have seen that happen. Not very often, but every now and then a franchisee, comes to the franchisor and goes, "Oh my God, I've received this invoice. What is this?" And actually, you then look at it, and I've had to turn around and go, "Well, did you use that image? Yes. You didn't have permission to use that image. Now you have to pay for it." So it's important to check. But if somebody steals or takes or copies one of your images, then it's just as important for you to follow that up and take action. So, if you went to all the trouble of commissioning work, having a photo shoot, putting all those fantastic images on your website, and then you find that somebody else, somebody copied your image and is using it, then it's equally as important for you to take action. If you don't take action, then that devalues what you have. So potentially you could run into difficulties if you were to enforce your rights later. So it's really important to take action as quickly as possible at the time when you actually discover that somebody is using your image. So that sort of leads me into the copyright and trademark infringement. It is something that is really, can be difficult to police, because obviously with the power of internet, it gone are the days of billboards. In the past, it was sort of kind of much easier. You drive somewhere, you see something and you go, "Oh, that's a bit naughty. They shouldn't have taken that. It's mine." Now on the internet, we don't even often see stuff, because we only see stuff that's personalized to where you are, to your location. If I'm sat in Manchester, what I will see if I put a phrase into Google will be very different from what Julie will see, or Tim or Simon, or any of you guys. So it's and it will change as well. Every time you sort of put a search, it can change. The results can change. So again, for me, it was about educating the network, because here's where you can really use your network as your eyes and ears. Because I have 2 eyes, I have 2 ears, but if you have 100 franchisees, that's that's 200 extra eyes and extra ears. So do use them, but explain to them what they're looking for. So if they come across something and they see somebody using an image that they know belongs to you, or is your brand, they can immediately just do a screenshot or take a picture with their phone. And then that's something that can't change. They can send that across to you, and then you can take appropriate action. But it's letting people know what it is that they're looking for, and letting them know how what to do with it. And we very successfully stopped quite a few people of sort of using home instead name or images, or those people who copied our materials. I mean, the easy cases are the ones where the copying has been very bad. So somebody copied an advert that we put out and they forgot to change references to home instead to whatever their name was, and their brand still said, we're looking for registered manager who has experience working with home instead clients. And we were like, really? That's very interesting. But so it was very easy to prove that there was copying there. Some instances might be a little bit more difficult. But actually, the point about protecting and taking action was one of the points that was raised in the Pittman case. And again, so it's really, really important that you sort of look at that and look at what you've got, the processes that you have in place. The other point I want to briefly touch upon, because I appreciate we are sort of running out of time, is your franchise agreements. So again, the reason I wanted to bring that up is because we had two cases recently, the Pittman case and the Body Shop case, where the court looked at franchise agreements and there were a few things that came up. And there are sort of 3 points I wanted to make, and I'll probably take them sort of in reverse order. So number one, again and again and again, it comes up the fact that, whether the franchisee took legal advice before they signed the franchise agreement. And actually, that was one of the points that was really important in the Pittman case. And one of the reasons that the decision went into favor of the franchisor was the fact that the franchisor specifically insisted several times that the franchisee should take legal advice, and the franchisee didn't. Now, when lawyers say we recommend that you strongly encourage your prospective franchisees to take legal advice, it's not for our benefit, it's for your benefit. It's so that you are protected, because the point is the prospective franchisee should understand what they're signing up for, and if they don't, then that is likely to become an issue later on, because if what they expect doesn't match up with what you expect, at some point that's going to blow up. And it's much, much easier to deal with this at the very beginning than it is to deal with it, 3, 5, 10 years on. So legal advice, in my view, should be compulsory, but as a minimum, you should absolutely encourage and insist that they do. But also make sure that, if your franchisees do take legal advice, they should do that from a lawyer who understands franchising. So directing them to obviously BFA members would be the best thing you can do, and just making sure that they get proper advice from somebody who understands franchising. The other thing that came up in the judge commented on in the Pittman case was the fact that the franchisor said, several people at the franchisor organization said, you know what, we had real reservations about this person, about this prospect when they were coming through the process. And the judge said, well, if that was the case, why haven't you documented that? Because there was nothing to say that they had any reservations. But actually, a lot of people said, well, actually, when he was going through the process, we thought, not sure if they would be successful. They didn't strike us as, So ideally, if you have those concerns, you shouldn't really be taking somebody on that you don't think is going to be a successful franchisee, right? But if you're sort of like, I'm not sure, I don't know, they seem all right, but I have concerns, then just document that, make sure that that's somewhere and can be evidence. So if things do blow up later on, you can sort of say, we had concerns and we provided this extra support and we provided this extra training, and this person still didn't work out. Because that might be helpful to you. And finally, does your recruitment process match with the franchise agreement? What I mean by that is franchise agreement is one of the last steps in the process. But if your marketing materials and sort of all the materials that you give to your prospects say one thing and the franchise agreement says something completely different, that's going to be a mismatch. And that's going to be, again, a bit of an issue, might be a bit of an issue later on, because let's face it, most claims that arise in franchising context are misrepresentation claims, because that is usually the only avenue that's open to the franchisee. So the franchisee is going to argue, you sold me something that is different from what I thought you were selling me. I thought it was going to be something different, and it wasn't what I thought. So, and again, where sort of how it ties in with the Pittman case is, the argument there was all about exclusivity and whether or not the territory that the franchisee was granted was exclusive. And again, the judge really looked at what the franchise agreement said about exclusivity and what the materials, pre-franchise agreement materials said about exclusivity. And again, it's sort of a lesson from that case. In that case, Pittman Training actually had things done things the right way. They had everything, their house was in order, because what their agreement said and what their marketing documents said did match up. But I do sometimes see when I do franchise agreement reviews for prospective franchisees, obviously I don't see necessarily the marketing materials that they see, but I would comment on the franchise agreement, and sometimes if that's not what the franchisee expects, they'll say, oh, I didn't realize, I didn't know. And for me, that shouldn't really be the case, because your franchise agreement should match with everything else that the franchisee has been told up until that point in time. So key takeaways, hopefully. So your intellectual property, make sure that you've got systems in place to monitor use. Educate your network on sort of what that means and how they can help you in terms of looking out for any infringement and how to report it back. And then when you do have that, don't ignore it. If your franchisees say to you, this third party is using, has copied something or is using our name, or, it's your job to follow up and to take action, because as a franchisor, it's your job to protect your brand. So you should be doing something about it. Now, from a practical perspective, what you do might be different in every case, but you do need to assess and to decide what you're going to do about it. In terms of your franchise agreement, it's really important that your franchise agreement reflects your actual business and how your business works and what it is that you are granting to your franchisees. So, in terms of exclusivity, are we actually talking about exclusive territories or allocated territories? What is the scope of that right? So what is it exactly that the franchisee is buying? And the important part here is that, whatever it is called, is the prospective franchisee's understanding the same as yours? That's what's really important. And the franchise agreements, they still should be reviewed from time to time and updated as necessary. I mean, that was one of the big lessons from the Body Shop case. I mean, that franchise agreement was written sort of 40 years ago and not updated since. The franchisor made a mistake in terms of feeling that the only way for them to resolve the situation was to go to court. And, that didn't work out well for them. Actually, there's, given the situation, there's a lot other options that they had, and they should have taken a different option, in my opinion. But yeah, franchise agreements, you should review them from time to time and update if necessary. And with prospective franchisees, insist that they get legal advice and at least document the fact that you've done that. So if you can, to protect yourself, make sure that there is some sort of evidence that you have to say, we have advised them to take legal advice, they chose not to. And litigation should always be the last resort. I always say that if you end up in court, you've lost already, because neither party wins when you get that far. And in my experience, there are so many options to resolve things before it gets that bad. And usually they're not sort of necessarily legal options, they're very much practical options. So it's super important to consider what's best. So that is me. Just one last thing to say. Obviously, some of you may have noticed I've after having come back to private practice, I have now decided to set up on my own. So as of this week, I have launched on my own, and this is how you can find me. Do connect with me on LinkedIn. So I'm very much looking forward to continuing to support franchisors, franchisees, your networks in any way that I can, to make sure that your business is a success, their business is a success, and things are done the right way, so that franchising is seen as a massive success. So I'll stop sharing now, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Natalia, and thank you also for sharing some of the earlier information with you. I mean, I've known you for quite a while now, and I knew some of the story, but not all of it. And going back to, I always think it's interesting just in terms of how people actually, end up doing what we're doing. And to some degree, we all seem to fall into the franchising world, basically. Some might call it the pit, but there we go. And so, Simon, I noticed you've had your hand up to ask a question, so we'll open the questions now. We're on the ask anything you want. Here we go.
Natalia, thank you very much indeed. That was really helpful, and given the opportunity to get some free legal advice, I think I'll ask the question. But no, one of the things I'm really interested in, and again, the Body Shop, you mentioned the Body Shop case of their, I mean, how often should a franchisor be updating their agreement? Should it be looked at after every significant judgment? Because we've had quite a few significant judgments, haven't we? Drain Doctor, Pitman, Body Shop, and they all focus on different aspects of franchising. And to follow that up, just a quick one: when a judgment is being made, will the judge put a lot more weight on legal precedent, i.e., judgments that have taken place in the framework of franchising, or will they take the franchise agreement at face value, i.e., the one that's been signed by the franchisee?
Sure, absolutely. Two very, very good questions, Simon. You see, so how often should you update your franchise agreement? I mean, the problem is that obviously, if you update your franchise agreement and you already have an existing network, then whatever updates you make, can be immediately applied, rolled out to new franchisees joining, and any renewal, on any resale. But you still have the question mark over your existing network, because actually it's really difficult to make changes. You can't really make changes to your existing franchise agreements unless it's something really, really super significant, and you have already allowed yourself that right in your existing franchise agreement to make that change. So my approach with this when I was in-house was that I sort of had a list from all our experiences, and not necessarily just the case law, but I would say from your experience as a franchisor, you should, or somebody within your organization should, keep a list of, we had a situation and this came up, and actually we found the franchise agreement didn't quite work, or there was an issue, and keep that list. And then at some point, when that list becomes significant enough, you kind of go, I now have enough to make a change to my franchise agreement. Unless there is a decision that is like so significant that you feel, I absolutely have to make that change now, and that, and now is the time. But like in terms of Body Shop case, what I would like to think that there isn't currently a franchise agreement in place that's worded in the way that the Body Shop agreement was worded, because that was quite old, you know what I mean? Yeah. We have since moved on, and actually most franchise agreements, and certainly most franchise agreements I see, would always say that the renewal will be on then current terms.
Then current terms,
so
yeah.
That should already be covered. So I would say, check your agreement, and just hopefully it's a tick. I don't need to do anything. With other things like, again, so you mentioned Drain Doctor case. Again, most agreements should already say within them, that if the restrictions are found to be too wide, the franchisor has the right to, to reduce the scope of the restrictions. Again, it should be the case of just looking at it and ticking it.
Yeah.
Now with postcodes, so last year Atlas Mapping brought it to our attention, the fact that postcodes change from time to time and sort of how to tackle that. That I would say, but again, it's not, for me as a franchisor, I'd want to change my agreement now to allow me, to put that extra wording in that allows you for postcode changes if they're changed by Royal Mail. But that amendment is not significant that it's absolutely necessary for everyone. I would just look at that as I've updated my franchise agreement, and over time everyone will eventually transition on the right one. So I'd simply roll it out for all the new ones, all the renewals, etc. But within your franchise agreement, you should, they typically, again, if it's drafted by a BFA member lawyer, you'd see a clause that basically says, allows the franchisor to make a change if there is a significant change that makes the agreement unworkable.
Yeah.
In that case, the agreement.
So you can't change it just because of legal precedent covering yourself, that any judge would, for example, look at in making their decision, because they're ignorant about franchising, for example, that they would disregard the agreement that's been signed and look at case law in making their judgment.
So to come to your second question, yes. So judges will, because we are, we're a common law jurisdiction, which basically means that decisions by the courts here are made based on other decisions of the courts that have been made. So the judges would look at, what other decisions have been made, and only a higher court can overrule, a decision that's been made by a lower court. So in that case, that's why we're a common law jurisdiction. So it is all about case law, and that is an important part. But equally, judges will not rewrite your agreement. So again, that is something that came up in the Body Shop case. The judge said, no, the agreement is, the agreement contains a renewal clause. The clause says exactly what it is. It is very clear what it says. It makes sense, and we're not here to rewrite it. The fact that it's out of date doesn't matter. So the judge very much left it and said, no, it still works. It still makes sense. So we can't rewrite what the parties intended.
I mean, a lot of franchisors are led to believe that their franchise agreement is bulletproof, and I guess that's complacency again, why they're not updated. So I guess the moral of the story is try and avoid litigation and use mediation if you can, because it can be a lottery, a very expensive lottery, if you get to court and lose.
Absolutely.
Tim Morris.
Sorry, thank you.
Thanks, Simon. Tim, we can't see you, but I can see you've got your hand up.
I think you can see me now.
Yeah.
As you can see, I have parked up. I'm driving today, but I was interested, Natalia, in your description of the challenges of misrepresentation charges by franchisees. What's your view on what I would call an eyes wide open document, which goes through those really clear points before the franchise agreement has been signed? For example, I have sought independent legal advice. I fully understand, and then those key clauses, my exclusive territory and what that means. So there's something else to fall back on to say the franchisee was aware of these areas that he's now claiming he's got concerns about.
So do you mean like almost having like a summary, another summary document?
Exactly, those really key items that we know cause problems.
I mean, it's so, you see, I do like that idea. There are, however, some sort of things that I always say, like, franchisors should be aware, because, so what I would say is, yes, that's great, but the risk here is that would replace the franchise agreement, as in the franchisee wouldn't even look at the franchise agreement, and that would be my concern. But yes, I do like that. So and we have used it with other documentation, so not necessarily the franchise agreement, but so with consumer facing businesses, when you have terms and conditions, we sort of created summaries to say, look, these are the main terms, but they don't replace the full T's and C's, and you should still read them. So you can do that. And I would say that, if there are particular points that come up again and again, that is very useful. But you should also look at your practices. So what I mean by that is that if you are, the franchise agreement and any summary or anything like that should be given to the franchisee in good time. They should also be given plenty of time to go and get legal advice. If the franchise agreement lands at the franchise, in franchisee's hands on a Friday and training is on a Monday, and they're expected to have read, looked at it, understood it, and signed it by Monday, that's a no-no, because actually that gives them zero time to go and get legal advice. It gives them zero time to properly understand it. It gives them zero time to have the opportunity to raise any questions. So for me, it's about what you've got in place, but then also from a practical perspective, making sure, and that's where it comes back to the process, that actually the process is robust enough that allows sufficient time at every stage, so that, again, to protect you as a franchisor. So you can then, so the franchisee can never, so that it's more difficult for the franchisee to say, I didn't understand what I was doing, I didn't know, I wasn't given time, or I was put under pressure. And as long as you can sort of have evidence to counteract those 4 arguments, then I think you're in a good position. But you should be able to kind of, absolutely be able to evidence, and that's the trick, to be able to evidence those things. So the more you can do to protect yourself.
Just a couple of additional operational points. One of the things we do is we have a formal offer part of the recruitment process, and in the formal offer, it basically, which the franchisee signs, accepts, pays initial deposit, it says, I've received a copy of the franchise agreement and I've been advised to take legal advice in relation to the agreement. So that's documented. And then we have a pre-opening manual, which they get when they've done that. And then the manual basically says checklist, and one of the points is take an advice in terms of the franchise agreement, ask for a copy if they've had a written report, ask for a copy of the written report from the lawyer, and again keep that on file basically, which again is, to some degree as much as you can do to try and get towards a belt and braces place. And the other thing that we do, just thinking quickly in terms of, I guess, operational kind of tips, at the end of the induction training, we always advise that there's a report, like a review of the training carried out, a report produced, which is shared with the franchisee, that's, again, in terms of training audit, you're good at this, you're not so good at this, we've identified areas of weakness, this is what we're going to do to address it. And they then have to sign up, to commit to the additional training, which again is another part of the audit trail. So we're coming to the end of the session. I'm aware, Katrina, we've kind of not welcomed you yet. Karen, Nadine, Richard, does anyone have any of the franchisors? As Simon said, it's the great chance to get some free legal advice. Does anyone have a question that they would like to ask, or a point they'd like to make to contribute before we finish the session for today?
Wanted to say thank you to Natalia for jumping in. I missed the very first bit, so I was thinking, where's Melvin? So yeah, fab, thanks for that. That was really good. And obviously I've known of you for years, since you were at Hamilton Prat. So but again, backstory, didn't know, really interesting. And so thank you, and fab for jumping in at the last minute and getting all that together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm all good, thank you.
Nadine, great. Karen? Good. Jacob? Good. Okay, well, just to finish off and just confirm that Melvin Lusty, who's a guest today, has been taken ill and has literally lost his voice, so hence he's not here today, but he will be back as the guest in February. And the event that's in February is not quite the first Friday, it's Friday the 9th of February, because Melvin's on a cruise the week before, but actually in reality because it's the franchise exhibition at Olympia on the 2nd of February, so we've avoided that. And as anyone that's seen my LinkedIn post, which was just prior to this meeting, has seen, I'm going to the first franchise exhibition for about 5, 6, 7 years, however long it is, basically, because I've not been during the COVID years. So hopefully if anyone else is going to the exhibition, it would be great to see you there. And just finally again to thank Natalia for jumping in at such short notice and being very brave. Chris did think at one point it was his role, which was a bit naughty of me. But
and congratulations on starting your own business as well. I think that's fantastic.
yeah, massive.
I think you'll do really well. You've got so much experience there.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.